Now, the biggest of the big industrial users, Mr. Speaker, are tending to generate their own power, and often in cogeneration situations. And granted, there's a need on the part of those users, those generators, to be able to dump their excess power when they have it onto the grid and have it go somewhere. Essentially, Mr. Speaker, when a generator generates electricity, that generator, no matter who it is, whether it's a company engaged in a manufacturing or industrial enterprise, whether it is a company like TransAlta or EPCOR, Capital Power, ENMAX, that is generating power to provide to electricity users, once that company generates the power, that company really doesn't care where the electricity ends up. All that company is concerned about, and rightly so, is having the ability to put that generating capacity, that realized generating capacity, onto the grid and have somebody else deliver it somewhere where it's needed. This is really key in the case of coal-fired generators, and I'll come back to that in a second. The point here, though, that I was making in terms of consumption of electricity in Alberta by sector is there's been much talk about the impact that building this gold-plated Lexus of a transmission system will have on individual homeowners' electricity bills, whether it's $8 a month or $2,000 a year or anything in between. And I'm not even going to stand here and argue the numbers at this point. We can get that specific if we need to at committee stage. But what we're forgetting when we talk about that is the impact that paying for this grid, paying for the package of upgrades to this grid will have on industrial users, will have on commercial users, will have on institutional users, will have on employers. I submit, Mr. Speaker, that there's a risk here that we're going to make some of them non-competitive, uncompetitive. We're going to make some of them pick up and move to Saskatchewan if we go through with this whole thing, hook, line, and sinker, as has been proposed, or even if we go through it in stages. But there's a few things to take into consideration here. Number one, Bill 50 does remove the right of public input at the needs assessment stage. Yes, it still provides for the AUC to hold hearings on siting and things like that. But really, if a high voltage 500 kilovolt direct current transmission line or two have already been declared critical transmission infrastructure by this government, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Speaker, but I don't know of any electrical engineers, or for that matter even electricians, sitting in cabinet, so I don't know where the expertise comes for the minister or the premier or the cabinet to make the decisions as to whether this is critical transmission infrastructure or not. But once that declaration under Bill 50 were to be made, then there's no choice, really, but to go ahead with holding the siting hearings. And really, what kind of extra pressure does that put on the AUC to approve whatever siting, within reason, has been already spelled out by the ASO? I mean, there's going to be a lot of added pressure on the AUC to just roll through with this thing. We have to remember, whether they're industrial, commercial, institutional, residential, farm consumers are getting stuck with this bill, 100% of this bill. Therefore, consumers, in my view, Mr. Speaker, have the right to challenge the need for the expenditure and the right to an impartial weighing of the facts by the AUC. Politicians, as I mentioned, are not experts at electricity. We should not be making decisions about critical infrastructure, and neither should ASO. Because ASO's credibility on this score is suspect too. Not because ASO are bad people. They're good people. They're well-meaning people. And they may indeed, as I think the Minister of Energy pointed out yesterday in question period, they may indeed have 200 electrical engineers working for them, on call to them, that they can consult for their opinion as to where you need to put these lines. But Mr. Speaker, they could have 200 or 2,000 or 2 million for all that matter. And it wouldn't make a difference so long as the ISO is restricted by the mandate this government gave the ISO to consider one and only one remedy for every problem that the ISO encounters. And that remedy is build more transmission lines. That's the only thing they consider. So what other answer are they going to come up with? Well, Mr. Speaker, if you don't go down the route of approving Bill 50, there are other options, because there are, under the Electric Statutes Act as it exists now, opportunities and requirements. The AESO is required to submit a needs identification document for every line it wants to build. Others who are involved in that situation, the actual owner of a transmission facility, has the means to object if it believes that ISO's proposal is stupid or dangerous or ill-informed. And these sorts of things are the things that the minister and cabinet and government want to punt. And I don't think there's any justification for that. You know, it doesn't matter as far as the general public is concerned that AUC will still be holding siting hearings, because the general public still doesn't get a public hearing around the need for the line in the first place. And this public hearing, Mr. Speaker, is called a public interest hearing. A public interest hearing. The AUC holds these hearings, which I understand the Department of Energy think take far too long, slows the process down by 2 years, and as I referenced earlier, Mr. Speaker, we're mere hours away from rolling brownouts, according to the proponents of this thing. But they hold these public interest hearings to determine and to allow you, Mr. Speaker, and me, and the honourable member from Calgary Montrose, if he wants, and independent experts, most importantly, to weigh in as to whether the social, economic, and environmental impacts of building said transmission line are in the public interest or not. History is full, Mr. Speaker, of absolute rulers with absolute power who got the trains to run on time, but it turns out that none of them was so hot at acting in the public interest on an ongoing basis. And I think that's worth keeping in mind. Mr. Speaker, Bill 50 would be something that I would be very happy with if I was the operator of coal-fired generating facilities, because coal-fired generating facilities are really hard to start up if they shut down. And of course, you have to shut them down periodically for planned maintenance, and every once in a while one of them goes down for unplanned maintenance, and then you have to start them up again. But these are not facilities that you turn off and on with the flick of a switch. It takes a while to power these things up. They are difficult to power up, and it is much better if you got a big old smoke-belching coal-fired generating station to keep that thing, once you've got it on, running 24/7, 365 with, the scheduled maintenance intervals. And so that power, Mr. Speaker, that electricity that big old coal-fired generating plant is producing, well, it has to go somewhere. And interestingly, the coal-fired generating stations are mostly located west of the city of Edmonton. And the load, the people who need the power, well, they're in Edmonton, they're in the industrial heartland, they're also in the south, in and around Calgary, and down into southern Alberta. And these lines will function very well at getting coal-fired generating capacity, coal-fired generated electricity from Wabamun or wherever down to the people in Calgary, as an example. Okay, that's great. People in Calgary need power. Everybody knows we Calgarians, although we do try